So I took this photo of Home Plus, which is like Korea's version of Walmart, about 10 years ago. And this is what it looks like today. Home Plus used to be the center point of Naesamidong, my old neighborhood. And now it's not even visible from the trees and buildings covering it up. You used to be able to see it from all angles of the city. And in 2023, it's just kind of there amongst other buildings that are similar in height. What was once a bright landmark of Naesamidong is now an aging sign of the past, just like Osan College Station, where I lived 10 years ago and has definitely seen better days. My old neighborhood in Osan used to have big open skies and felt a lot like living in the countryside, but now it feels more like a big city, with buildings in place of where the sky used to be. There were empty fields back then where you could see the trains passing by, and now you can't even see the train tracks anymore. This is just an example of how much Korea has changed over the last 10 years, but some changes take a long time, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Yeah, so this is the first neighborhood I lived in when I first came to Korea exactly 10 years ago. I arrived at the bus terminal in Osan kind of Sunday night, and I started work the next morning, which it shocked me because I thought I'd get a little bit of training or maybe a couple days off just to get over the jet lag, but no, just starting right away the next day. So that was quite the experience. In this area of Osan, there was nobody around, you know, no foreigners or anything like that, at least that I knew at the time. So the first 6 months were a little bit lonely for sure. So this video will just kind of help you decide if Korea is the right place for you, what it's like to live here long term as a foreigner, if it's a place that's really worth living, or maybe if it's just a place that's better for traveling. In 2012, when I first visited here as a tourist, that's when Gangnam Style came out. And that was kind of the first big cultural phenomenon to come out of Korea. So K-pop wasn't really a big thing worldwide until Gangnam Style, I think, at least in the Western world. So that really blew things up, and that was kind of the same time I got here. So it felt like I was here just on the very start of this kind of cultural upswing. And my neighborhood of Naesamidong in Osan was complete countryside, you know? There were kind of cabbage fields all over the place. There weren't really that many big businesses or anything like that. It was just kind of mom and pop shops. It was really, really quiet. Weren't many people walking around, weren't many cars. And at the time, the hagwon I was working at was just kind of in the middle of nowhere. There was just like a bunch of fields around. There was a grocery store across the street and just one building, which is where my hagwon was. So it's pretty crazy to see it now when like there's so many businesses everywhere. They actually started constructing the area kind of when I was living there. It's definitely interesting to see how much it's changed now with all these restaurants and businesses kind of. It seems like it's booming a lot, you know? So let's transition to the second half of this video where I'm going to talk about what it's like living here as a foreigner long term and if this is a place for you. We'll start out the absolute most common thing that people hear is you will never be Korean, because Korea is almost, I think it's about 97% Korean ethnicity. So if you're a foreigner, you really stick out. I just want to talk about what I think about this topic after living here for 10 years because I'm planning on staying in Korea and it's important that I'm accepted here to be able to live here long term. So when it comes to this topic, basically anytime you go into a grocery store or a convenience store or something and you walk in there, people aren't going to expect you to speak Korean or know the mannerisms of what to do, you know? A lot of the times, like especially if you've studied Korean and you kind of understand how to do things and you talk to them in Korean, they'll be really surprised and really happy most of the time, you know? They'll be like, 와, 한국말을 진짜 잘하시네요. 거의 한국 사람보다 잘하시는 것 같은데? Which means, wow, your Korean's so good. You're literally better at Korean than a Korean person, which is not true at all. They've been saying that since I first came here, and like when I could just say like 안녕하세요 or 감사합니다, they would always shower me with compliments like, It's the most amazing thing that I can say these few words. It is slowly going away in Seoul a little bit, especially in this neighborhood of Shincheon where I live, because there's so many students that are studying Korean, so it's not that rare for foreigners to speak Korean, but it still does happen a lot. They're just trying to compliment you, or they're trying to make you feel welcome. Just try not to take offense to it. If you get offended by stuff like that, then maybe coming to Korea to live long term is not a good idea. I think this won't go away anytime soon. It is changing a lot over time, but just something to know. And then there's the cultural aspect of it, where let's say you're going to dinner with like a family or coworkers or friends or something like that. In Korea, everyone has a very, very specific role, and they have a very specific way of doing things. People really like to take care of each other here, and they like to feed each other, and they like to give the other person water first. They like to do stuff for other people a lot more before they do it for themselves. Whereas in the West, we kind of do things a lot more independently. Like we go to a restaurant and we split the bill up. Everyone eats their own food that they want to eat. In Korea, you're in it together. It's a group activity. Everyone's eating the same thing. And like just for example, at a barbecue restaurant, you might have the younger people grilling the meat and pouring drinks for the elderly. And then you'll have the moms and the aunts like feeding the young because they want to take care of them. And then maybe the uncles and the dads will be like taking care of the bill. And there's definitely direct roles that Koreans are very used to because they deal with it all the time, and they're very good at dealing with these group situations. But people never expect these things from me, you know? So even though I've lived here for 10 years and I know that you have to give other people chopsticks before you take it yourself, or I know you have to pour other people water or alcohol first, one thing I want to say is if you do things as much as you can like a Korean person, especially at a restaurant, people will really appreciate it, and it's definitely the easiest way to get closer to people. So that's kind of one good way to get out of that whole you will never be Korean mindset. And then when it comes to family, so family is a big thing in Korea, right? And to be honest, before I got married here, I didn't expect people to take care of me so well. And I expected to be kind of like an outsider, you know? I really truly feel like I'm a part of Eugene family. It feels like people would go so far out of their way to help me, and they really care for me, and they always just make me feel so welcome and accepted, and it's been like that since the very beginning. And I'm so lucky to be in this situation because I've seen people that aren't really. And when you think about the subject of you can never be Korean, I think going into a Korean family is one way where you can kind of feel like you're a part of things here. And it definitely makes me feel more a part of society because we care for each other a lot. And it's made me a lot closer to Korea in general. And now let's talk about the topic of marriage. So we can make a whole video about this, but a lot of people might be curious. Maybe they want to live in Korea long term and they're kind of curious, like, what if you get married? Do things change? And is it going to be more difficult with the cultural differences? And I just want to say that everybody is the same, you know? Whenever you live with somebody for a long time, no matter what culture they're from, you're going to have differences, you're going to have arguments. You just kind of got to embrace the differences and trust each other, respect each other, no matter what culture, what race you are, it doesn't matter. There will be different opinions for sure about different topics, but everybody is like that. Everybody is different in this world, and it's just important to know that before you get into the relationship, just so that you're not expecting something to be like special or different, and then you get disappointed later. People are all the same in this world, and that's really important to know. And let's talk about work. So obviously, if you're living here long term, you're going to need a job. In Korea, jobs are a lot more limited to foreigners overall. As a native English speaker from one of these countries, I'll just put a title here. You can teach English here forever. You can work your way up the ladder too. There are better jobs the more experience you have, just like if you stay back home. You can start your own business, just like my friend did, where he started his own kind of English study room, and he's doing really, really good, really successful with that. When it comes to things outside of English teaching though, you have to realize that The only way to get a job here is if it's worth a company to hire you instead of a Korean person. Unless it's a restaurant that has a lot of tourists that speak your language, there's probably not that many reasons for the manager to hire you. It's really important to know that there won't be that many job options available unless you get really good at Korean and you kind of specialize in something. For example, I've done freelance filmmaking a lot here, and the only reason I was able to get into it was, first of all, I had a lot of experience before I started it here, and I spoke Korean, which is really, really key because we're filming a lot of Koreans and I have to be able to communicate with them as well. If I didn't have any Korean ability, I don't think I'd be able to do freelance filmmaking at all. It's very, very important. It's just like any other country where you have to really stand out to get work. And another thing that you really need to consider is the visa. I can work as a videographer because I have an F visa from getting married, but when you get here, you won't have an F visa. If you're teaching English, you'll have an E2 visa, which only allows you to teach English, and it only allows you to work for that specific company as well. So it's hard to gain a lot of various experience unless you've been here for a while, you study Korean, and then you can work towards getting an F visa, which if you don't get married, there's also a point system. And then once you have an F visa, you can work in a lot of different industries, but it's just good to know that you probably won't get hired unless the industry specifically wants someone exactly like yourself, because there's probably a big chance that a Korean could do it otherwise. So after saying all of this, let's cover the question. Is Korea a good place to live long-term as a foreigner? And I'll answer it like this. Korea's a great country to live in for many people, but not for everybody. So first of all, if you're really open-minded, if you can deal with really fast-paced and really unpredictable environments, and especially last-minute and unpredictable changes. For example, if you're an English teacher, you might just hear from the boss that the next day you have to come in 2 hours early and there will be no warning at all. It'll just be, hey, come in tomorrow 2 hours early, even though it's not written on your contract that you have to do that. And in those cases, you can fight it. There is a system to protect you and make sure that your employers follow the contract. But just be aware that the contract will not always be followed 100%. And things won't always be exactly as you predict. And just things like problem solving are done a lot differently here than they are in Canada. Like, Koreans have their own way of doing things. And if you can't be open-minded and flexible to deal with a lot of these changes, it's going to be really, really hard, to be honest. Then there's just the outside world. Like, you might have a store or a restaurant that you really love in your neighborhood, and then the next day it's gone. Things change. They come and go all the time here. Things like going to the grocery store, like the prices of fruits and vegetables. One day broccoli will be $1, the next day it'll be $3.50, and then you're almost panicking like, oh, why is it so expensive all of a sudden? And let's say housing. You might watch K-dramas and you see all these beautiful apartments and there's high-rises everywhere in Korea. Your first year you come to Korea, you won't be living in a place like that. You'll be staying in a studio apartment that's really small in an older building. The location might not be that great. There could be mold problems. The furniture could be old. There could be an uncomfortable bed. Even though Korea is such a futuristic society, it's more common to live in an older place, especially your first year when you aren't making a lot of money. Let's say you're renting on your own at like a newer office tel or something, which is just a shared building between companies and people that are living there. In your housing contract, it might say that you just have like a $50 a month building fee, and then you get your first bill and it's $200 with all of these hidden fees. Like, maybe they didn't set up the heating and air conditioning system properly, so you have to pay the fee because they didn't install it properly, which is something that happened to me and Eugen. So there's just so many rapid changes, and things aren't always the way they look on paper when you go into something. And I'd say more so than living in Canada or America, at least from my experience. And then let's talk about the police. Like, you might be used to the police being really helpful. Well, Eugen and I got involved in a car scam in 2019, and we went to the police because we felt we had pretty good evidence of our scam and that they'd help us out. And the very first thing the police said was, "How much did you get scammed?" And we said it was in the thousands. And the officer literally said, well, it was just 6,000 and not 60,000. So just be happy that you didn't get scammed too hard. It made us lose all of our hope, you know? Like, we thought that the police would be willing to help us out and kind of catch this guy who scammed us. But instead, it just seemed like a huge hassle for him. And it was really, really hard to deal with the police. And these are really important things to know before coming here, because at least the police system is a lot different than it was in Canada. And I've heard this from multiple people too, so it's not just from my own story. You can look online of different people's experiences dealing with the police. There's still things like corruption going on, and things are definitely getting better every year, but it's just something to consider before moving here long term. So as for my reasons for living here long term, well, first of all, I met my wife, but even before that, I wanted to live here forever. And it's just because right now we're paying about $500 US a month to live in our favorite neighborhood in Seoul and maybe the world, you know? We got access to the subway, we got thousands of restaurants and international restaurants too. We can easily fly all over Asia for really cheap to Japan or to Taiwan or Vietnam or all these different places. And then on top of being in the big city with all these things to do, we have easy access to nature. Like, Korea has amazing cycling and hiking, and in the winter you can go skiing or you can go hiking up to beautiful mountains, and in the summer you can go to Jeju and relax on the beach. And the nature is pretty diverse for the size of the country. So these are the reasons that are keeping me here. And I just want to say they're a lot different than the reasons that I initially liked about Korea. I used to think it was this futuristic society that's just perfect. And it is true that there's beautiful people here, but there's also bad people here, just like any country. And it's really important to know that when you're coming here, you're not coming to some special place where everybody's perfect. There's good people and bad people just like any other country. And just to compare it to Canada, I would say Korea is a lot better when it comes to transportation, cost of living, convenience, safety, access to public health care. Traveling to other countries a lot easier. But then there's the downsides, right? Like, Korean society is way too competitive when it comes to school or workplaces. Everyone's forced to compete with each other, and it stresses them out like crazy. Like, you see people all the time that are just dealing with so much stress, and they're so overworked and so tired. And even as an English teacher here, you might work more hours and you might get less vacation than what you get in your home country. So your benefits might not be as good. So I've talked about how Korea's changed over the past 10 years and what it's like to live as a foreigner long term here. I love living here, just so you know. I don't plan on going anywhere else. It's still the #1 country for me. I have no regrets for coming here. If you want to live in Korea after watching this video, first of all, I just come here to travel. And you can have so many good experiences, like exploring Seoul and having all this amazing food, enjoying the nightlife, kind of looking at the palaces and the traditional culture. You can go into nature. There's so many things you can do here, you know? After you come here for a couple weeks, you might be really wanting to live here because you just had such an amazing time. I'd recommend just try and find a job here for a year, you know? If you're a native English speaker especially, try and get an English teacher job here and see what it's like for yourself. Apply to a bunch of schools and make sure to talk to the people that are working at the school first to ask about the studio apartment that they're living in and how the hours are and the holidays and all that kind of stuff. And just try and find a decent job and see what it's like for yourself. Because the only way to really know if you want to live here or not is to spend that first year here. And if you're not a native English speaker, there are jobs in like factories and farms and stuff like that that do sponsor visas as well. So just do a little bit of research, because you might find people from your own country that made guides on how to get jobs in Korea. Yeah, I don't want to make this video too long. Just wanted to talk about the last 10 years here. It's been a huge part of my life. I'm more making this video for myself, just to look back on someday, because Korea is my life now, you know. It's been quite the adventure for the last 10 years, and here's to 10 more with the Powerade right here. So hope everyone's doing good. Hope you're all healthy and happy, and we'll see you in another video.